This is a Fox News alert tonight. No specifics. That is promised June 30th. But there is a framework for an Iranian nuclear deal, and it is meeting with some skepticism from both sides of the aisle. Just hours ago, negotiators in Switzerland announcing an understanding outlining limits on Iran's nuclear program. But Speaker of the House John Boehner insisting congressional Republicans and Democrats will continue to press the Obama administration on the details, the specifics of those limits. And Fox News correspondent Leland Vitter joins us. Leland, what's the deal?
Well, it seems like, Greta, on the face of it at least, the United States gave up a lot to get even this agreement about making a deal. And it's possible it could all fall apart by June 30th. That's when everyone has to agree on something more than the vague language and principles, which is what we saw today. President Obama's Rose Garden speech today sounded very much like a victory lap, but the nitty-gritty of the deal is very different. Point by point, the U.S. appears to have caved on once core principles. Minutes before the president spoke, the Iranians themselves declared victory as their foreign minister said he felt good when he was in Switzerland, even hit back at the United States and its fact sheet. A few of the key points. While both sides agree to inspectors, the idea of snap inspections at any time at any of Iran's facilities, off the table. And while at one point the President of the United States talked about Iran disassembling their heavy water reactor, their heavily fortified underground nuclear enrichment facility at Fordo, and even some advanced centrifuges, Iran gets to keep all of those, even under this framework. All this comes as the U.S. policy against Iran becomes increasingly complicated, as we are fighting both with and against Iran in Syria, with them in Iraq, against them in Yemen, and now working together, in a sense, with this framework. The president's victory here at home may be short-lived, not a guarantee. Many on both sides of the aisle up on Capitol Hill say the most important date is April 13th. That is when the Senate returns and could, of course, pass legislation, making all of this discussion a moot point.
All right. And how much work is to be done between now and June 30th? I mean, we have this sort of this framework, and out that's just so vague that it doesn't mean anything. Or, I mean, are we close to getting all the details?
It seems as though the divide is so huge. Think about how long we had to go through negotiations, how many overtimes there were just to get a few points that both sides can't even agree on what those points mean. Now actually comes the nitty-gritty. How long do inspectors have to give the Iranians as advance notice before they come in? Exactly what happens to this enriched uranium? Exactly what kind of centrifuges can they come? All sorts of areas that this could fall apart.
I'll tell you, the no-snap inspections, that means where they just show up, right? Snap. That, I mean, that to me is the most telling, because Iran has lied. And, of course, they don't want snap inspections because then we may show up and see something.
Well, exactly. Not only have they lied about what they're doing, they've lied about where they're doing it. So it's not like the IAEA or international inspectors can all of a sudden just take their helicopter and fly to anywhere a satellite picture shows that there may be a problem. So the Iranians can be doing this and can be living by the letter of the agreement in one area and doing whatever they want in the other area. And so much of this agreement is based on the thought that the U.S. knows everything that Iran is doing. That is a heck of a gamble.
Stay tuned. Anyway, Leland, thank you.
Thanks, Greta.
And Israeli leaders are not happy about the deal, the general framework with Iran. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warning the deal will leave Iran just months away from being able to build a nuclear bomb. Former UN Ambassador John Bolton joins us. Good evening, sir. And your assessment of this framework. We don't have the specifics, but we have a framework.
Well, I don't think we have a framework. I mean, a framework implies something that all the parties have actually agreed to. And looking at the statements and the documents that have been issued today, I can only see one to which more than one party has affixed its name. That's the joint EU-Iran statement, which is short and vague, to say the least. Everything else is assertions by the parties of where they think things are. And I think as a practical negotiating matter, what that means is everything's up for grabs again in the next 3 months. I think that's exactly what Iran wanted. I think it just buys them more time. You know, we've been directly or indirectly negotiating with Iran for 12 years, 12 long years, and we're still negotiating, and the centrifuges are still spinning.
All right, suppose the President Obama likes what he sees on June 30th. Can he go alone, or is this a treaty and should go to two-thirds ratification, as the Constitution says, or should he get some sort of agreement from Congress? I know that they're the ones that have to lift the sanctions, the congressional sanctions, but does he have the authority to make this deal himself?
Well, politically, he would probably be better advised to get cooperation from Congress, but constitutionally, it's far from clear. Look, scholars count things in different ways, but there's no real dispute that since 1945, over 90% of the international agreements that the United States has entered into have been executive agreements of one form or another. The Senate has receded from its constitutional responsibility. That's a problem they've helped create, and it's very hard to get it back in one step. There's no bright line between executive agreements and treaties. This will be, as Professor Corwin, I think it was, said, an invitation to struggle.
What do you think tonight that Prime Minister Netanyahu is saying to his closest advisors?
He's saying we've been sold out. The Americans have given the Iranians everything they wanted. They've given them more political legitimacy. They've essentially legitimized their uranium enrichment program, which, with whatever constraint you want to put on it, is the long pole in the tent for a would-be nuclear proliferator. And it's all based on two incorrect assumptions. Assumption number one, we know everything there is to know about Iran's nuclear program today. And assumption number two, we will know everything they do for the next 10 years. Those are both false. And when you start off with foundations that are that flawed, it's only a short time before the thing falls apart.
All right, we have a map up showing Iran with all their known facilities, I should add. Known. They've hid some before, so I don't know if there are more on that map that we don't know. What did we get out of this deal?
Well, I think we really got very little. I think the president has other objectives in mind here, and I think if Congress wants to focus on what to look at this deal, it ought to insist that all parts of whatever understandings there are with Iran be made public, not just what the Perm 5 plus Germany have agreed with Iran. Are there other agreements? Is there an agreement to take them off the list of state sponsors of terrorism? Is there an agreement to establish full diplomatic recognition? In other words, is there a Cuba deal here?
Is it possible there's a deal to take them off the state-sponsored terrorism, and that would not be included in what they publicly disclose as of June 30th? I mean, you think they'd try to, slip that one in?
Look, the deal that is announced in the deal, we shouldn't call it a deal. What was announced in Geneva today was the result of the negotiations between the Perm 5 plus Germany and Iran. They don't have any role, the rest of them, in our bilateral dealings with Iran. And I think it's at least it's worth Congress asking the question, are there other issues on the table? The terrorism issue, diplomatic recognition, other trade restrictions that we have been discussing bilaterally with Iran, and something that you contemplate doing in the near future.
So what happens? Congress comes back to the 13th. They have some chatter and talk about it. They fire some words back and forth across the aisle to each other. Some Democrats don't like it, though. And then along comes June 30th, and then what?
Well, I'm not sure that on June 30th we won't still be negotiating for another parameters of another joint comprehensive program. I think that what Iran wants here is relief from the economic sanctions for obvious reasons, but they're not prepared to give up anything significant on the nuclear program. And I think these various statements that have been made today show that they haven't given up anything significant.
Well, if the UN gives up its sanctions, but the U.S. Congress sticks to the guns on their own, I mean, that's essentially giving Iran everything it wants on the sanctions, isn't it? Doesn't that sort of bust the sanctions if the rest of the world doesn't have sanctions?
Yeah, I don't think pounding our chest and saying we're going to impose more U.S. sanctions really accomplishes much. The only way the economic sanctions can be effective is if they're very comprehensive, they're universally applied, and they're rigorously enforced. The European countries are bending over backwards already to get rid of these sanctions. Countries like Russia and China have helped Iran evade the sanctions ever since they were put in place. And I think we've got to recognize that the very fact of these negotiations has encouraged people to think that the sanctions are coming down, and that's encouraged them to evade them already.
Ambassador, thank you.